This is Dante Williams, and you're watching
Dante's
Boxing Nation.
This is Showtime Sean Portman. Filipino Flash, Jesse Burns.
This is Al Bernstein. You're watching Dante's Boxing Nation.
Hi, I'm Sugar Ray.
Chick Shape.
Search over last name one.
Dante's Boxing Nation.
Boom, 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 boom. Yo, this is Deontay the Bronze Bomber Wilder.
My name is Gennady Golovkin.
And you're watching
Dante's Boxing Nation.
Dante's Boxing Nation, what's going on, guys? Well, I have to tell you, it looks like the news just keeps getting better and better for Deontay Wilder, the PBC series, and the official promoter of this fight, DIBELLA. As I just told you guys in a video that I did a couple days ago, I told you guys that the numbers had averaged around 1.8 million, and I told you guys that I heard from a very close source that the numbers actually peaked at a much higher number than 1.8 million. I said it was around 2 million or higher. Well, it turns out the numbers are actually better than the source that I got my information had told me the numbers would be. Now we find out through Nielsen reports that the Wilder versus Arreola views in the main event averaged at 2.54 million views. That's right. That means 2.5 million people tuned in to watch this fight. Now, what's really interesting is once the promoter of this fight, who was elated to find out that the fight that he basically promoted did 2.5 million views, Wilder, who basically carried this entire card himself because according to the boxing fans, this was such a huge mismatch, etc., etc. But the only reason Wilder was facing Arreola was because the real fighter that all the fans wanted to see Wilder go up against, he couldn't pass his drug test. But let me digress and go back to the point that I was making. So the promoter of this fight, which was DIBELLA, he was shocked and surprised when he heard the backlash and the ratings hate when it comes to this Al Heyman PBC card with Wilder versus Arreola in the main event. DIBELLA couldn't understand it. Well, Lou, all I have to say to you is welcome to the coincidental world that we live in. Unfortunately, if you guys watch my channel, then you know I'm not surprised at all because I always know what time it is. So anyway, this is really, really interesting, and it is very informative what DIBELLA had to say in response to every website or every fan that has been basically criticizing these great numbers that was generated this past weekend for the Wilder versus Arreola fight. This is what DIBELLA had to say. Matter of fact, you know, you guys, if I don't read the entire quote, you guys can go on boxingscene.com and go ahead and read exactly what was said. This is what Lou had to say. Quote, "The only other heavyweight title fight that's done that many people was when Wilder fought on free TV the last time. It did a similar number. No Klitschko fight over the last decade has had that many people watch it. Even when Lewis fought Tyson and it was enormous, less than 2 million homes saw it. So by what standards are you guys judging?" Yeah, exactly. What standards are you guys judging? That's a question that I'm always asking. In other words, who are you guys comparing these numbers to? What other boxing card on free TV are you guys comparing these numbers to? I want you guys to remember, PBC is not the only cards that have been on free TV. Golden Boy, he's had tons of fights on free TV. And a lot of times, those numbers are not even released when it comes to how many people tuned in. You guys remember ESPN Friday Night Fights? Those numbers were nowhere near 2 million views on free TV. Top Rank has had fights on free TV. So who are you guys comparing these numbers to? I'll tell you who they're comparing these numbers to. Because in one article, and I bullshit you not, I'm not making this up, they actually said the reason why these numbers are not good because they compared the numbers to Dateline on free TV. A show that's been on TV for over 10 years, right? This is what they compared the numbers to. They didn't compare it to another boxing card. No, they have to set the standards much higher when it comes to PBC, right? It can't just be boxing versus boxing, or I should say fight card versus fight card, because that would just be too easy. There would be no one that could compete with these type of numbers on free TV. One more time, when we all know that Usain Bolt is the fastest man on the planet. But if you were to say, well, you know what, I mean, okay, so he's faster than every other human. But if you were to put him up against a cheetah, then he would look extremely slow. So if we put him up against a cheetah, now we can actually say that, you know what, Usain Bolt is actually slow. I mean, look how quick that goddamn cheetah got past the finish line compared to Usain Bolt. This is pretty much what they are saying, right? We know that PBC numbers, especially this Wilder versus Arreola fight, has great numbers. But if you compare the numbers to the presidential debate, if you compare the numbers to American Idol that's on free TV, oh, these are horrible numbers, right? Forget about comparing these numbers to all the cards that Bob Arum and Oscar De La Hoya put on free TV, right? Forget about comparing these numbers to Friday Night Fights. Let's compare these numbers to Empire, right? Let's compare these numbers to American Idol. Let's compare these numbers to the Super Bowl, right? So when Lou DiBella asked the question, what standards are you guys judging? There's your answer, Lou. That's the standards that they're judging. They want Usain Bolt to be faster than that goddamn cheetah. Those are the standards that they are judging, okay? Now let's move on because I want to quote some more of what Lou DiBella had to say because Lou, he went deep. I mean, he really hit them with the whole truth. He had a lot to say about this because he was offended, which he should be. I mean, it's just blowing Lou DiBella's mind that there would be anyone actually criticizing these numbers. Now, before I continue reading what Lou DiBella had to say, because once again, he had a lot to say about this situation. This article on BoxingScene.com is pretty interesting because the person who wrote the article, Keith Idec, he was actually trying to counter what Lou DiBella said within the article. And he would counter the article by basically trying to defend Tyson Lewis numbers and Vitaly and Vladimir Klitschko's numbers. So this was the writer's response in regards to Lewis versus Tyson's numbers. Okay, so he basically says, and once again, I'll put the link in the description box so you guys can read everything that was posted basically. But he basically says, you know, the Lewis versus Tyson numbers drew 1.97 million pay-per-view buys. It was the second most in heavyweight history behind Evander Holyfield versus Tyson in 1997. Then he goes on to say, it is difficult to quantify how many people actually watched the Lewis Tyson fight live because buys don't account for the amount of viewers who actually watch the fight in a given bar, home, or restaurant. Now, what's so ironic about what he just said is that same logic also applies to Ward versus Arreola. You can say the exact same thing using the same words verbatim when it comes to Wilder versus Arreola numbers. Check it out. It is difficult to quantify how many people actually watch the Wilder versus Arreola fight live because buys don't account for the amount of viewers who actually watch the fight in a given bar, home, or restaurant. Do you guys get it? The same thing that writer just said for Tyson versus Lewis, it also applies for Wilder versus Arreola. And you know, Lou DiBella, he kind of touches on this, which I'm going to continue to read what he had to say. The point is, once again, the same logic applies. We don't know how many fans were sitting at a bar watching this. We don't know how many fans were sitting at a restaurant watching this. Hell, you know, it's funny because I just went to a restaurant today, a fast food restaurant. I don't know if you guys have heard of it, Capriati's. I went to Capriati's today, and the damnedest thing, I go in there, and for the first time, I look up at the TV, and I see PBC boxing is playing in Capriati's restaurant. And I'm like, I take a double look, and I look, and I'm like, whoa, wait a minute. That's the fight that Lou DiBella was promoting at the Wilder versus Arreola card, right? So I'm watching that fight while I'm in the restaurant. So once again, this is how we know that logic applies to Wilder versus Arreola and not just Lewis versus Tyson. Then the writer, he goes on to try to defend Klitschko's low numbers in contrast to Wilder versus Arreola. But I'm going to talk a little bit more about that after I read a little bit more of what Lou DiBella had to say and then give you guys my response to that as well. So let's move on with Lou DiBella. Okay, so Lou DiBella continues. This is what he says, quote, people are sitting there writing articles and tweets are going up about the disappointing numbers on Fox. That's horseshit. Why would anyone be disappointed by over 2.5 million homes watching a heavyweight title fight with an American heavyweight champion? When Gennady Golovkin fought on pay-per-view against David Lemieux on October 17th, and this is no criticism of Golovkin, a little bit more than 100,000 homes saw that fight. This Saturday night, there's a very good fight. Terrence Crawford versus Victor Postol is what he's talking about, going on pay-per-view. I'm rooting for promoter Bob Arum to do very well, for Top Rank to do well with it. I really am. I'm hoping it gets a big audience. But if they do 100,000 homes, they're going to be pleased. And there are people out there trying to twist the heavyweight title fight being seen in 2.5 million homes as some kind of disappointment. As the promoter of that fight, I'm not disappointed. I think that's good for boxing. I think that's great for Deontay Wilder. Now you guys notice how Lou DiBella, he made that comparison. And he said, if Crawford versus Postol does 100,000 views, Bob Arum is going to be pleased to get those numbers. Tom Loeffler, Gennady Golovkin's promoter to this day, he's still telling people that the 100,000 people that tuned in and paid for Golovkin versus Lemieux, that's a good number. That's what Tom is saying. Not only did Tom say it, but you even had a reporter that interviewed Teddy Atlas, And he was trying to convince Teddy Atlas that 100 to 150,000 pay-per-views is a good number. And Teddy Atlas looked at this reporter like he was crazy. And he said, no, it's not. In the words of Teddy Atlas, that's not that much. And he kept saying that over and over. Okay? I want to ask you fans a question. And when I ask you this question, I want you to answer this question in your heart. Okay? It doesn't matter what you type, because you can type something that you know deep down you don't really believe and you don't feel. I want you to answer this question in your heart right now. If Gennady Golovkin fought David Lemieux, Dominic Wade, Willie Monroe, Marco Antonio Rubio, if he fought any of these fighters on free TV, and that fight generated anywhere from 2 to 3 million views, would you be calling those disappointing numbers? Would you be on Twitter saying these are garbage numbers that Golovkin just pulled in this past weekend? Would you be saying that when it comes to Gennady Golovkin? And we know that's a rhetorical question, because the answer is a hell to the no. Of course you wouldn't be complaining. There were fans that was so adamant when it comes to defending Golovkin's pay-per-view numbers that was reported to be anywhere from 97,000 to 150,000. There were boxing fans and boxing writers that was trying to suggest those were excellent numbers. Excellent numbers. Right? So we know once again the answer. So once again, when Lou DiBella says, how is it possible that, Golovkin could fight Lemieux and do about 100,000 views, and that's good? Meanwhile, the heavyweight champion of the world fighting against Chris Arreola pulls in 2.5 million TVs watching his fight. And you're going to tell me those are bad numbers? Are you out of your damn mind? It makes no damn sense. But once again, we know what time it is. And like Lou DiBella said, what standards are you guys judging this by? Right? That is the question. The standard is called a double standard. Moving on. Lou DiBella continues, because he ain't finished. Like I said, he had a whole lot to say. And he was dropping a whole lot of facts on top of what he had to say. Let's continue. So this is Lou DiBella. I want to put a different slant on what I've been reading about the Fox show. And I saw a lot of tweets popping up. Oh, PBC continues to disappoint. I can tell you, I don't believe Fox was disappointed. PBC was not disappointed. And I can tell you that as Deontay Wilder's promoter, I certainly wasn't disappointed. Over 2.5 million homes, somewhere well excess probably of 10 million people, saw an American heavyweight champion put on a gutsy, courageous performance on free television. That's good for boxing, and those are not Lou DiBella numbers. Those are Nielsen numbers. Now let's go back and highlight one thing that he said that stood out. There was a couple things he said that stood out, but let's just start with this. Lou DiBella says Fox wasn't disappointed, and PBC is not disappointed. And certainly, Lou DiBella, as the promoter, is not disappointed. They are very happy when it comes to this type of success. Now, something else stood out when Lou DiBella, he said, once again, over 2.5 million homes, somewhere well in excess, probably of 10 million people saw this fight. Now, why I think that's interesting, because I go back to when, once again, I told you the writer, when he was defending Lewis versus Tyson numbers, he said, well, you know, that doesn't really account for all of the people in restaurants and in homes and bars that were watching the fight. This is what I meant when I said earlier, Lou DiBella, he touched on that. He said the same thing for this fight. Think about it, guys. Think about how many fight parties were put on for this Deontay Wilder fight. Think about how many fight parties were put together in Alabama, where Deontay Wilder is from. Think of how many bars were filled up watching the fight in Alabama and all across the country. Right? I just told you guys I went to a restaurant tonight and I seen PBC on TV. Yeah. If you add up all of the people that were actually watching that fight, you're easily looking at 5, 10, 15 million people. Right? That's only common sense. Lou DiBella, he concluded by basically saying this: that's not a failure. That would be a really, really skewed way of interpreting numbers and viewing something. And even the welterweight fight with Felix Diaz and Sammy Vasquez, which was a very good fight, that did not peak at the number WILDER-ARREOLA did. But when was the last time that many households saw any Golovkin or Kovalev fight on premium cable? They haven't. And that's more people that have seen an American heavyweight champion fight in God knows how many years. I'm not sitting here trying to crap on anybody else's product. I'm just saying that I don't view that as a failure as the promoter. I view that as a good night for boxing. End quote. You know, it is really unfortunate that we are so divided in this country. Because if you really, really think about it, if people would just focus on just the sport of boxing that they love, and if they would just remove all of the personal animosity and disdain that they have for people on the coincidental list, then everyone would work together to praise and congratulate someone for doing something that is good for boxing. Do you guys know, in this article that I just read, as many times as Lou DiBella said repeatedly, over 2.5 million people tuned in to watch Arreola or Wilder versus Arreola. Do you know the writer of this article, not one time did he mention this fight did 2.5 million views? Do you know that this writer, he preferred to report the lowest number that was averaged before the main event took place? Think about this for a second, guys. This was Wilder versus Arreola, right? That was the name of the fight card. This was Wilder versus Arreola. Coincidentally, once the main event came on, this is when we seen a jump to 2.5 million people watching. So why would someone be focused on the lowest numbers that was generated before the main event? Once again, I'll put the link in the description box. You guys can read this article. While Lou DiBella is giving the highest average number, the writer of this article is putting down the lowest average number. Does that make any sense, guys? I mean, if you really think about it, that's almost me throwing a house party and let's say 300 people show up in my house, right? Let's say some people left early because they had other stuff to do, or maybe they had to go to work the next day, right? And then the next day, some random person, he asked, so how was Dante's party? How many people showed up? And he says, only 100 people was there, right? Even though this person, he's seen the house filled up with 300 people, he wants to give the lowest number. So he wants to count when everybody start going home or whatever the case may be. This is pretty much the same situation with these average numbers of 1.45 versus 2.5 million. Something else I noticed is there were a lot of websites. Normally when writers report numbers of TV ratings, they always have the average number and the peak number. What I'm starting to notice is there are a lot of writers starting to be very deceptive by only putting the average numbers because they don't want people to see the actual peak numbers. This is the type of deception that we are dealing with in the sport of boxing, guys. And once again, if you guys really love this sport, people need to stop looking at race, at whatever reason you have for personally disliking someone to where it's disrupting you from doing the right thing and doing your job properly. We need to stop that. We need to stop that. We, as a boxing community, we should be doing everything we can possibly do to help this sport grow. There's a reason why the media is a big part of the sport. That is to reach out to more boxing fans. Not only just report the news, but give new fighters exposure, to reach out to new boxing fans. That is the reason why the media is supposed to show up to cover fights that are being promoted, etc., etc. Because the job is to get as many people as possible to tune in and make the sport of boxing as big as it used to be. When Oscar De La Hoya and Bob Arum were putting fights on free TV, where were these tweets? Where were these articles saying De La Hoya top ranks, terrible numbers, disappointing TV ratings? Where were the tweets? What were the tweets then? If it's not one thing, it's another. You hear fans saying Al Heyman puts on nothing but mismatches. Meanwhile, we just got done watching Canelo versus Khan. Now we're going to watch Canelo versus Liam Smith. While you have Jamal Charlo that's about to fight against the undefeated, one of the most dangerous fighters, probably the most dangerous fighter at 154, Julian "The Rock" Williams. And that may be another fight that may end up on PBC, right? On this Wilder versus Arreola undercard, you had Sammy Vasquez going up against Felix Diaz. Undefeated Sammy Vasquez going up against Felix Diaz, who arguably is undefeated according to a lot of fans, because a lot of people believe he beat Lamont Peterson. But anyway, my point is, Felix Diaz goes up against Sammy Vasquez. Damn near 50-50 fight. A lot of people thinking because Sammy is the undefeated fighter, he's supposed to win. Guess what? Big ass upset. or let's just say it's an upset. Felix Diaz wins, right? On the undercard, you had undefeated prospect Jamal James going up against Wale Omotoso. Another extremely tough fight. So competitive, it was split down the middle. Some people thought Omotoso won. Some people thought Jamal James won. Very competitive fight. Erickson Lubin, he fights against a very tough Mexican fighter, Ivan Montero, with a record of 20-1. Lubin only has I think around 9, or I forget how many fights he has, but he doesn't have too many. And he's fighting against a guy with, of course, a lot more experience, tough Mexican fighter. Very competitive matches. The biggest fight this year to date, and the most watched fight in 2016 so far, Keith Thurman versus Shawn Porter. Not only did the fight do ridiculous numbers, but the fight lived up to its expectations, or I should say it exceeded expectations. But yet, when you're on a coincidental list, it's not what we see with our own eyes. It's not facts and stats that we see with our own eyes. We're supposed to believe what these ignorant fans are telling us, right? They're telling us, oh, don't believe those numbers you see. Believe what I'm telling you. This is what the decaf will try to tell you. Don't listen to it. Keep believing your damn eyes. All right? That's pretty much all I got for now, guys. I'm on to the next one.